On November 30th, an update for Marvel's Avengers was released that included Spider-Man for PlayStation players and a number of other additions for all players. One new addition was Shipments, which was meant to complement the earnable cosmetic system already in the game, and the other addition, and potentially the largest contribution of this update, was the game's first raid, Discordant Sound. So on today's video, I'm going to be giving part 2 of my early thoughts on the November 30th update for Marvel's Avengers.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another carrotscraps video, and by another, I mean the 90th. So things have been going pretty well since the last time you saw me, other than the time traveler living on my couch. The move has been fine. One minor snag is that I don't have any furniture. But no problem, no worries. I moved everything here in boxes, and so I've been kind of building my own furniture out of cardboard. Don't worry, I know what you're thinking, but like, stay with me. I think I've been doing a pretty good job with what I got. Like, for example, I made that thing over there. I think it's pretty good. It's a work in progress, right? It gets the job done. I also have one of these, which admittedly could be better, but I'm learning on the job. You know what I mean? I think I'm doing pretty good here, building my own cardboard furniture. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about Marvel's Avengers' first raid, Discordant Sound. Now, as a quick disclaimer, this is technically the second part of a two-part video on the 2021 November 30th update. Part 1 was about Spider-Man, and it came out about a month ago, and this second part is going to be covering Shipments, the raid, and everything else associated with the November 30th update. So without further ado, let's get into my early thoughts, although these thoughts aren't really early anymore, but we'll get into my early thoughts on the Discordant Sound raid. So I have a lot of positives and negatives about the raid that stick out to me when I think about it. But to kind of give a narrative to my thoughts, I'm going to take you through what playing the raid is like and give my thoughts as we go on. So let's talk about how the raid starts. So first of all, I like the story opening of the raid. It feels really tense, and I think it sets up the stakes and the tone well. It also feels like the start of a really authentic Avengers mission. However, I really dislike that there's not an opening animation for this raid. For every other mission in the game, you either see your heroes enter or fall from the jet in a cinematic fashion. You would think that for such an important mission like the raid, that the same would be true, but for whatever reason, this is the only mission that is missing that cinematic, at least to my knowledge. I don't know, I just thought that was an odd detail, and every time I start the raid, it's the first thing that comes to mind. Anyway, so you start the mission and fight a number of claw enemies before entering the dungeon and fighting the first new enemy. The first new enemy of the raid is the Command Crawler, and is a progression of an already existing enemy from War for Wakanda. So at first, I didn't necessarily see anything too different about the Command Crawler from the other crawlers that we've seen in the game so far. I mean, obviously it was larger and more powerful, but other than that, I didn't really see too much. But upon further inspection, it does have other abilities like cloaking, and it can spawn other crawlers. I also noticed the web yank ability a lot more, and I'm not sure if this existed with previous crawlers, but I noticed it a lot with the Command Crawler. And I gotta say, I didn't necessarily like the web yank. It never felt like fun to try and dodge, or it just felt annoying for the most part. It always comes at the wrong time. But anyway, you're at the entrance of this metaphorical dungeon, and you have to fight a giant crawler. This giant spider is essentially your first boss battle for the raid. And I actually really like this opening battle. I think it's a good beginner challenge, a larger and moderately more powerful enemy than you're used to give you a taste of what you're getting in for. So those combat scenarios are essentially your introduction to the raid, but as those conclude, the metaphorical dungeon begins to open up, and you're welcome to your first puzzles.
The first puzzle that you're introduced to in the raid spreads your team out, asking players to control certain zones while avoiding an attack from Claw, with the ultimate goal being to press 3 buttons at the same time in unison. This synchronized button press is actually a theme throughout the rest of the raid, and I really like the way that it's introduced here.
Now, I absolutely love the amount and the design of a lot of the puzzles in the raid, but I do have one consistent problem with all of the puzzles in this mission, and that problem is I feel like these puzzles aren't designed in a way for players to easily figure out how to solve these problems. And even though I love the puzzles in the raid, this is a consistent criticism that I have of the entire experience. So as you move on, you enter another cavern in this dungeon, and you're given the choice of left or right for progress. Now, it's simple, but I really love this little choice that the game gives you, giving you the opportunity to strategize with your team on which direction makes the most sense, especially if you know what challenges await weight you down each path is a really cool idea to me. Anyway, let's start our discussion by talking about the left path. The left has an interesting platforming puzzle that you have to navigate to get to the next room. However, I've found that most players choose to cheese through this challenge. They do this by having their flying teammate go to the desired location and have the rest of the team die and then respawn next to them. Now obviously I want respawning to be somewhat simple, and I know there's not a lot that the team could have done to avoid this, but I do wish that this area wasn't so easy to cheese. With most of the groups that I've played with, they opt for this option every time, instead of trying to complete the challenge ahead of them. Then for the challenge on the left, you enter a throne-like room with Shuri, and you juggle several different objectives. You'll have to make sure that the corrupted vibranium isn't getting too close to the center of the room, while also sending teammates to another location to obtain a buff that will allow them to destroy the corrupted vibranium permanently. I really like this room. I think it's a really cool puzzle. Like many things in the raid, I like that it asks the players to cooperate and communicate. I also love that there's so much to juggle at once. In general, I like the concept of this buff in the raid, where you have to send one player to go obtain the buff, and then you need to stay close to other players to make sure that it's working. I think that's a really inventive idea to force players to split up, but then also to come back together, because your buff doesn't work unless you're close enough to your teammates. So it keeps a level of independence and cooperation at all times.
Now, when it comes to criticisms, I will say that this room is another example of the larger problem that I have with the raid, that I don't think that the solutions to these puzzles are communicated very well.
And so, while I can appreciate the idea that a player who solves a mystery on their own will feel more rewarded, I personally don't think there's enough information and context clues to solve a lot of these puzzles. Majority of the time, I've solved these puzzles through trial and error, or with communication with friends who already know what to do. But completing these puzzles for the first time took a while, and I will admit that it got a little bit frustrating after a while. I like the addition of puzzles in the raid, I just wish the solution to these puzzles was communicated more easily. I'm not saying that I want the dev team to give the players the answers immediately. I just think that in the future, the team could work a little bit harder on making the solution to these problems a little bit easier to figure out. So now that we've talked about the content on the left side of the room, let's shift gears and talk about the content on the right side. The first puzzle that players must complete is a series of doors that only open when a series of pressure plate buttons are pressed in a specific order. I think it's a really cool idea and a very abstract one compared to the other puzzles already in the game. And again, I love how it allows and it encourages players to communicate. However, with all of that being said, I have no idea how to complete this puzzle. I've played the raid multiple times and with multiple groups at this point, and I still have no idea how to solve this puzzle, and neither did anybody else that I played with, which is really sad because on the surface, it's a great idea. It's just too cryptic. I think this puzzle just needs one more degree of simplicity, like maybe the buttons being labeled with the symbols or something like that. It's wild to me that every group that I've been with still doesn't know how to complete this puzzle, but at least it's reassuring that I'm not the only one experiencing that confusion. So again, this is the biggest criticism I have of the raid. The puzzles shouldn't be this cryptic. I really think there should be a little bit more communication from the game to the player for what they should be doing to move forward. I honestly learned this from making levels in Mario Maker. If you think your level is too easy, it probably isn't. It's a difficult balance to achieve, but generally speaking, I think since you designed the level, you're always going to think it's easier than it actually is. So moving forward, I think the developers should try to communicate better with players in future content on how to complete these kinds of puzzles. Because I love the ideas for these puzzles. I just wish I knew how to complete them, and I wish it was easier for me to learn. I'm gonna move on now, but this is one of the most frustrating parts of the raid to me, and it's a recurring criticism that I have for most of the challenges in the raid. But it's especially frustrating because I want to like these puzzles. I just don't always know what to do. Anyway, let's move on to my favorite part of the raid. After that puzzle, you enter the Vibranium Tower, and I call it the Vibranium Tower because I forget what this thing is called. So if we're all good with that, we're all on the same page, let's just move on. This is another example of really creative puzzle design. Now, I've been asking for better mission objectives since launch, and this puzzle provides them and exceeds any expectations that I had. So one player has to remain in an area at the bottom to allow other players to go to the top. The player on the bottom will see a symbol that players on the top can't see, and so once again, players need to communicate to get that information to each other. The player on the top will then destroy a vent marked with the same symbol. After that, the final part of the puzzle is that another player, typically a flying character, will attack the exposed vibranium vent protruding out of the center of the tower, and you do that for each of the multiple symbols. Again, let me reiterate, this is a fantastic room. It's such a cool idea, it's so unique compared to other puzzles in the game, and any other game honestly. and I think it's a place in the raid where communication is the best and the most needed throughout the entire mission. My only criticism once again is that the puzzle could have been a little bit more straightforward because my first couple of playthroughs I had some issues understanding what I was meant to do. But once you understand what you need to do, this is potentially the highlight of the entire mission. I absolutely love this puzzle, and I'm really impressed by what the team did here. Oh, you know what? That actually reminds me. Carrotslurps, you're me from the future. What did you think of the Discordant Sound raid?
I really liked it. Thought it was totally apples.
Okay, short and sweet. You know, I figured, but I just wanted to double check. So with all of that prelude out of the way, it's finally time for you to take on the big bad, Ulysses Claw. Now, the Claw fight is broken up into two sections. The final sections of the raid are your team fighting Ulysses Claw in various arenas with different solutions. In the first arena, players have to survive a wipe attack. Now, I know there's another name for this, but when I say wipe attack, I'm talking about an attack that will instantly kill a player immediately. So yeah, there's a consistent wipe attack that players are meant to avoid while fighting fodder enemies until you're able to attack Claw in his eye. And I mean like directly in his eyeball. You're just supposed to box his retina. And I feel like this is a great time to bring up the other new enemy that was introduced in this raid. Not because of the eye thing, but because of the fodder enemies. Anyway, we're going to talk about echoes. First of all, before the release of the raid, I saw a lot of people say that the echoes were just going to be other enemies in pink, and I'm really happy to see that that isn't the case. We get these bizarre, hulking, pig-faced enemies that look really cool, and then we get these echo drones that cause a lot of trouble for the player. I like their visual design the most. They're a little simple when it comes to gameplay, but I like what they do. What I really love about these enemies and the way that they're used in the raid is the idea that feeding these enemies into a certain area will grant the player a buff. And I'd love to see this mechanic used in future missions, because it's such a cool idea. Anyway, I really like the echoes, and I think the team did a really great job with designing them. After the Claw face fight, you enter the final combat arena, and again, I have mixed feelings here. Overall, I really like this arena, and I really like the combat cycle for how you do damage to Claw. There are multiple cycles for how Claw behaves, and the player has to build up a stun meter before they're able to actually damage his health bar. And I think this cycle and the other cycles in this fight are really engaging. My only problem with this section is that sometimes it takes an incredibly long time to raise his stun meter and to do damage to his health bar. One of the reasons why it takes so much time is because the cycle will trigger at a weird moment. So for example, multiple times I've been close to defeating Claw with only a small fraction of his health bar left, when suddenly the cycle will end, and then I need to spend a tremendous amount of time raising the stun meter again. The thing is, I think the gameplay loop in this fight takes enough time as it is. I don't think this fight needs to be extended any further. And at the very least, I'd like these cycles to trigger at less frustrating moments. Because even though in that scenario that I gave, I only have a little bit of his health to chip away, it's gonna take a long time to raise his stun meter again. It was just a little tiny, come on, I put a lot of time into this. I think you could have given me that little less time. Again, not like a serious criticism. I don't think there's something dramatically bad happening here. It was just, I've had a couple of times playing the raid where I was like, come on, I should have beat that guy. You know what I mean? I don't know how else to explain it. Another thing that this fight features heavily is the mechanic where a player has to go to another location, secure a buff for the team so that way they can attack the enemy. And again, I really love this idea, and I'm glad that they used it more than once in the raid. Specifically, I love that it gives multiple players different things to do. I also really like that there are so many phases to this fight. Having Claw do so many different things makes this fight feel really real. A lot of the other boss fights in the game can be a little bit simple. But for example, when you're fighting Claw, it feels less like you're playing a video game than when you're fighting Abomination. And I think it has to do with all of the different things that Claw can do. As you can tell, even though I have prominent criticisms of the raid, overall I really enjoyed the experience. But there's still one important thing that we need to talk about. And before we move on to it, I wanted to address a couple of more things about the raid. One of the bigger criticisms that I have about the raid are the rewards. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who said that. Now look, I like the time investment when playing the raid, but sometimes I do think that it's a little long and arduous for the comparably small reward at the end of the experience. And again, there are definitely people who feel a little bit more passionately about this criticism. If you've followed my channel for a little while, I'm sure you know that I don't really care that much about loot. Although I'm trying to care more about loot and gear in this game, you know, we'll see what happens there. But I still think it's important to mention. Because again, I like the length of the mission, but maybe a larger reward at the end would help the time investment feel more impactful. But on the other side, one of the biggest compliments that I could give to the raid is the way that challenge is presented to the player. So of course, Marvel's Avengers is a live service looter brawler, and the game has been out for a considerable amount of time now, which means that there are a lot of players who have invested an insane amount of time into getting the best gear in the game. And so for some time now, we've been able to see certain players delete bosses like Abomination and Taskmaster in very little time at all. And I've seen arguments on both sides of the aisle on whether this is a problem or not. On one hand, some players think that this is a good thing. The fact that you can defeat that boss so quickly is evidence of your hard work in the game. But on the other hand, there are other people who want a greater challenge and still want to keep playing the game. And I think the raid does something interesting that keeps the game challenging for all players. First of all, there are plenty of combat scenarios where having the best or most powerful gear is still important. You can still show off that mega powerful gear against certain enemies. But there are a number of other challenges in this raid where having high stats doesn't help you, primarily the challenges that involve communication and puzzle solving. Featuring content like that in the raid ensures that all players will be challenged by the mission. I think this was a really smart idea, and I think the devs deserve a lot of credit for this. Making sure that their hardcore players still feel powerful with their gear that they worked hard to get, but also providing a challenge that gear won't magically save them from. When I think about the qualities of the raid, this is one of the first things that comes to mind. Anyway, let's transition and talk about the underbelly of this raid, and something that's a little bit more difficult to tackle: bugs. As awesome as it was to have all of this new stuff come in the update, like the new character and the raid, it wasn't all sunshine on the day of release. Now when it comes to the November 30th update, there were two scenarios where bugs were discussed the most. The first was in regards to the bugs that affected the raid specifically, and the second was in regards to units and fragments suddenly disappearing. Let's start by talking about bugs in the Discordant Sound raid. So at this point, I kind of hate talking about bugs on this channel when it comes to Marvel's Avengers, and it's not for the reason that you're thinking. I have no problem communicating bugs when I experience them, and I think it's totally fair to call out any bugs or glitches you experience in a game that you invest time or money in. However, the raid has been heavily criticized for the amount of bugs that are featured. But speaking personally, I haven't experienced the same amount of bugs that others seem to have. And the bugs that I did experience were inconsequential in my opinion. The only ones I can think of are visual in nature and didn't affect my gameplay at all. So the reason I always hate talking about bugs when it comes to Avengers is because I don't experience as many bugs as everybody else seems to. And I've been accused of lying before, but I don't know what to tell you. This is just my experience with the game. But that being said, just because I haven't experienced these bugs doesn't mean that they don't exist. And I'm not trying to tell people that they're less important because I don't experience them. Let's be clear, my experiences do not invalidate the experiences of others. The bugs that definitely do exist in the raid definitely aren't cool. In addition, it's really difficult for players to enjoy the game and celebrate its victories when it's not working as advertised. I know that other players experience far more serious bugs than myself, and I really can't stress this enough. I want the development team to work harder in the future to make these bugs less frequent, especially when it comes to a piece of endgame content that requires so much investment. From what I've heard from other people's experiences, people invest a lot of time into the raid only for a bug to reset their progress. For a lot of people, that's the potential of at least 1 hour of wasted time, and I can't imagine how frustrating that is. Not to mention that the game has been out for a while, and I'd like to think that a lot of these bugs should have been worked out by now. But anyway, while I sympathize and empathize with the people who are going through these problems, and while I hope the development team takes advice from the community and works on these bugs more seriously in the future, like I said, I personally haven't experienced that many bugs when it comes to the raid. And again, the bugs that I did experience were minor, nothing that forced me to reset the mission. I've run the raid a couple of times now, and the only bugs I really experienced are slight visual ones. The only reason I've had to quit the raid mid-playing it is because someone left my group and we couldn't complete it alone. So when it comes to bugs for the raid, all I can say is that I want the game to function better for other players, but for me, it's functioned as advertised. Now when it comes to the other big bug that was associated with the November 30th update, I definitely did experience that one. And that of course was the infamous bug where player units and fragments suddenly disappeared. And boy, do I have a lot to say about that one. So on the November 30th update, most if not all players lost their units and fragments. And while those players still had units and fragments to speak of, it wasn't the accurate number that they had before the update. Speaking personally, I did a pretty seriously long grind to earn my units before Shipments came out, and post-update my unit collection was nowhere near what it was pre-update. This was a seriously frustrating update because not only did it affect something new that came to the game in the form of preventing players from interacting with shipments, but it also invalidated a lot of time that players put into grinding that currency. And I don't know what else to say other than this was extremely disappointing to hear, and I was shocked to see that it happened. And again, this is added to the metaphorical stone tablet of some of the worst bugs that we've had in Avengers so far. It doesn't reach the top of the list on that tablet, but you know, it's at least on there. Because losing this hard to get currency on the day that you would be spending that currency the most is really demoralizing. But I'm happy to say that eventually the development team found a way to get units and fragments back to these players. Now, to be clear, this mistake shouldn't have happened in the first place, but I'm really proud of the team for sticking by their players and giving them what they earned. Once I had lost my fragments and units, myself and many other players were worried that we weren't going to get nearly as many back that we had. But I was really happy to see that in most cases, the team gave back almost exactly what you had lost. So overall, I think this was a bad situation that was handled really well after. But there was another bug that I experienced on that November 30th that maybe not everybody else did. And this is in regards to a Spider-Man skin that I purchased from the marketplace. Essentially, I bought the Mach 4 Spider-Man skin from the marketplace only to realize that it was the final reward on the Spider-Man Hero Challenge card, meaning I essentially purchased the skin twice. I tweeted at the Avengers Twitter account, and shortly after, I was informed that the Mach 4 skin was removed from the marketplace, implying that it wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. Now, if I had known that the skin was on the challenge card, I wouldn't have purchased it from the marketplace. And generally speaking, when I purchase a challenge card, it's with the assumption that the cosmetics on that card are exclusive to that card. Either way, this was a huge bummer for me. I don't have a lot of money, and investing what little money I do have in the skins only to find I didn't have to spend as much as I did can be really frustrating. And again, to the development team, I'd say just please be more careful when you update the game. In the end, this isn't the first big update to come to the game with bugs and glitches on the first day. I think generally speaking, live service games or games that get frequent updates tend to experience bugs and glitches pretty regularly, since the version of the game that developers are working on is different than the live service version of the game that most players are using. And then replacing the live version with the developer version is always going to introduce some trouble. But these glitches and bugs really do affect the enthusiasm of the community, and as I've requested many times before to the devs, if at all possible, please do what you can to avoid these kinds of bugs making it into the game. Because like I said earlier, on the day of this update, I really wanted to celebrate the great things that were coming to the game, but it was difficult for me to do so because I was distracted by all these shortcomings. When it comes to bugs, I mean, look, I know it can't be easy building a game like this. It's not easy building anything. I mean, I started building cardboard furniture, and I'll be honest, a lot of my stuff has problems, you know? Yeah, like that. That's one piece of furniture that has had an issue. Yeah, okay. 2 pieces of cardboard furniture that's had an issue. Look, I didn't go to, furniture school. I didn't get a furniture building degree, especially out of cardboard, so I'm going to have issue. My point was, when it comes to bugs, I don't know what my point was. What was my point? Anyway, let's move on from bugs and glitches and talk about shipments. When Marvel's Avengers launched, players had the option to pay real money for new skins, or to use an in-game currency called units at the cosmetic vendor run by a character called Chastity to get new skins. However, after the release of the Future Imperfect DLC, the free earnable cosmetic shop was removed temporarily from the game, with the promise that a rework was on its way. Many months later, we finally received our cosmetic rework with the return of Chastity. So with the return of Chastity, you can once again use units to purchase free skins at her shop. However, you can also use your units on a shipment, which offers players the opportunity to win a random assortment of items. Each shipment is random and has the potential to give the player a free skin, takedown, nameplate, and various other resources. In addition to all of that, every month or so there'll be a new specialty item. The specialty shipment item takes the form of a high-quality original skin. players can either get this specialty skin in a random shipment, or if they purchase 100 shipments. For players like myself who have been collecting units for a very long time now, it's great to have something like this to spend my currency on. I also really appreciate the variety and quality of items I can earn in each shipment. I was really surprised to see that I could just earn random takedowns in the shipments, and I think that's really cool. Not to mention, the first specialty item, the Wakandan Iron Man skin, was a huge surprise and a big breath of fresh air. And then the second specialty item that we've gotten so far is a free MCU skin. Getting a high quality original skin and an MCU skin for free just by playing the game is really awesome, and I feel like it addresses a lot of the criticisms about cosmetics that people have had for a while. Speaking personally, I'd rather have more original skins added to the game than MCU skins, but I'm happy that a lot of the MCU fans are getting something too. Now, I love the goal of buying 100 shipments to get a high quality skin free of charge. I think doing that has earned a lot of faith back from the community that has been critical of a lot of the team's cosmetic decisions. In general, I also just like giving options like this to the player. Choosing between the cheap 500 units on a random assortment of items versus an expensive purchase of a specific item from Chastity is a really cool decision to make, I think. I think giving the player little choices like that helps enrich the day-to-day life of a live service game like this. Also, we've seen recently that new team sets are going to be added to the Chastity shop, which I think is really awesome. I know a lot of players aren't the biggest fan of the team skins or the recolor skins, but I personally really love them and know of a lot of other players who enjoy them. And at the very least, it's nice to get skins that normally would be priced at $5 each for free just by playing the game. Now, my biggest problem with the shipments is the units themselves and how you're expected to earn them. A lot of players have accumulated quite the collection of units over time. However, that collection won't last forever. And for players who are just starting who don't have a large collection, I think the grind to earn more units is a little arduous. So I'd like to see less tedious and more entertaining ways to grind for units to pay for these shipments. I also will admit I'm a little confused as to why earnable cosmetics were removed for so long to make way for this. I feel we could have had the cosmetic vendor this entire time while the team worked on shipments as well. Either way, I really like the shipment system. It's a great new addition to the game, and it's something that I track regularly. You know, I know my cardboard furniture isn't perfect. But I actually kind of like it. I'm thinking of showing it to some people, seeing what they think, you know, maybe listing it on, you know, the Facebook Marketplace or eBay or something like that. I'll let you know how that goes. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video.
So a few things before I go. First of all, if you liked this review of the raid and you wanted a shorter, less detailed version of it, go check out SynchroChamp on YouTube, where myself and many other Avengers content creators gave a short, quick review of the raid. SynchroChamp is really cool, and I thought it was a really fun idea to collaborate on this. In addition, on January 25th, which should be today, at 6 p.m. PST and 9 p.m. EST, I'll be battling one of my best friends in the Avengers community, Suki is okay. Suki and I are huge anime fans, but we find ourselves taking different sides on the big three, with myself being a huge Bleach fan and Suki being a big One Piece fan. And so we're playing as the main characters of both anime and fighting each other on the 25th to decide something. I don't know exactly what this will decide, whether Bleach or One Piece is better, or whether one of us are better at Jump Force, but we're gonna play Jump Force to decide something. Anyway, I'm really excited about it. Suki is super cool, and I think this is a really fun idea. So check it out if you're interested.
If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the kind of videos that I wanna make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you wanna watch me play Marvel's Avengers and other video games live, make sure to check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, are at carrotscraps as well. So I wanna thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Now look, I understand when you're making stuff, it's not easy, you know? I mean, I'm making all this cardboard furniture. Cardboard furniture? What is that? What? I mean, I'm building all this cardboard furniture. Why can't I say cardboard?